As it has been assigned, we have two questions which were given. We shall take them up before we get on to the text. The first question: how to cultivate an attitude of dispossessiveness. Repeat, how to cultivate an attitude of dispossessiveness. It was interesting to read through your answers in the group. I wouldn't want to say whether you're right or wrong. As I've said, it's always important is the exercise of engaging your intellect. Now, this question is known as a leading question. So every one of you all, barring one person, has actually fallen a trap into this question. I'll explain firstly what a leading question means. A leading question means something which prompts or encourages the answer which is wanted from you. Something which prompts one to answer in a particular way. So it forces you to think in a particular way. So when I ask you the question, how does one cultivate a quality of dispossessiveness? It is presupposing that you must cultivate it, and it forces you to think in that line that how does one go about cultivating. That is called a leading question. Example, in the court of law, if a lawyer were to ask this question to a party, when did you stop beating your wife? If that person tries to answer that question, what it presupposes is that you have been beating your wife and he wants to know when did you stop beating. A leading question. That's one example. And perhaps another example is if you were to take how fast was the red car when it smashed into that green vehicle. How fast was the red car when it smashed into the green vehicle? So when you are raising that point, it presupposes that the red car was at fault. Secondly, when it smashed into the green car, it means that the red car was at high speed. These are all presupposed. It forces you to think in a particular line of thought. That is called a leading question. So this is one such leading question. Because everybody were very pedantic, very poetic, very exquisite in their language in trying to answer how does one go about cultivate this quality of dispossessiveness. In fact, to answer that question in simple, plain, blunt terms, how does one cultivate this attitude of dispossessiveness? The answer is you cannot cultivate it. You cannot cultivate this attitude of dispossessiveness. First point. Now, second point you got to understand is that this quality of dispossessiveness, why can't you cultivate, is because this quality of dispossessiveness is not a cause, it is rather in effect. So you can't go about getting it directly. It's not a cause. This possessiveness is an effect. So you can't go about getting it directly through a process or a means. This possessiveness is indirectly acquired through one's spiritual sadhana. In fact, this possessiveness is a quality of an expression of a spiritual sadhak who is established in the higher. So this possessiveness is a quality of a spiritual sadhak who is established in the higher. So it's not something which you cultivate it. It is not something that you can acquire it. It is not a cause. It is an effect. It is the flavor of a spiritual person who is established in the higher. Now, if you say if it is not the cause, it is the effect, then what is the cause? The cause is the spiritual sadhana itself. And what is the spiritual sadhana? In simple layman's terms, spiritual sadhana simply means you are focusing your thought and attention, you're focusing your mind on something higher. You're focusing your attention on the essential aspects of life. The essentials are the higher values, the higher aspects of life. So when the spiritual practitioner goes about shifting his attention to the essential aspects of life, in effect, when he develops an attachment to the higher, the result of that, over a period of time, he will develop a sense of this passion or this possessiveness to the non-essentials of life. So when you shift your attention to the essentials, over a period of time, you will develop this possession, this passion towards the non-essentials. So this passion, or what is known as vairagya, is a quality control of a spiritual person. So when you talk of quality control, it is the product. It is the end of the chain of a production line. So if the production here is akin to spiritual sadhana, the end product of spiritual sadhana is vairagya, is that fragrance of this possessiveness, that fragrance of this passion. You can't go about directly getting it. You can't go about directly cultivating it. It is an indirect product, indirectly got. It is a fruit of your spiritual labor. It is not the cause of your spiritual sadhana. It is the effect of your spiritual sadhana. And lastly, this dispossessive attitude is not measured by the quantity or quality of your possession and enjoyment. This possessive attitude is not measured by either the quantity or quality of possession and enjoyment of the world. Now, what do I mean by quantity and quality? For example, a person may have no possessions at all, very, very minimal. Or he has many number of possessions. Quantity. Quality is, it is not that you may possess, but they are of ordinary quality. For example, you may say, oh, I have a watch, but it is only an ordinary watch, a Casio watch. Or quality, I have a Rolex, or I have a Patek Philippe. So does the quality determine whether you are dispossessive? Oh, I am only wearing an ordinary 500 rupees watch. Oh, look at the simplicity. Oh, look at him. He is wearing a brand new Rolex watch. Very materialistic fellow. Now you cannot go about judging that attitude of dispossessiveness by the quantum or the quality of your possession or enjoyment of your possessions. It is measured by your attitude. An attitude which arises. What attitude? An attitude that you have no value for them. So this passion is, you lose the charm, they lose the charm for you, so you have no value for it. So you can't go about developing that attitude of having no value. Can you? Very difficult, don't try it. So don't go about trying to develop an attitude of no value. What you develop is, you develop a value for something else. When you develop a value for the higher, then the value for the lower drops. So vairagya, or this dispossessive attitude, is not something that you can cultivate it. It is something, an outcome, a product of your journey. An only person who has come closest to this line of thought is Sethuramanji. So his answer was succinctly capturing this. I was so tempted to comment in the group when he presented the answer, but I didn't want to give away. So I said, it is very important that you don't miss the line of thought. It's a very, very a beautiful question, even more beautiful answer. I don't know whether you agree or not, but I agree. Whoever said it very beautifully. Yeah? Now I am saying that being very objective because it's a very beautiful observation, and I would mention the Rajima and Jayama to capture this in the works. Okay, it's very, very important. Okay, so take a note of it. Use the source to capture it. Now, before I take up the second question, are there any clarifications or comments to this question and answer?
Guruji, just for my understanding, like with an example.
Yes, Amar.
The example you showed, for example, a man was having 500 Rolex. So how should that attitude be? I mean, though you wear that 500 rupees watch, I mean, you should not have that value or whether Rolex. See, sometimes people, though they have the money less, but they have the value for the brand and they'll keep it. Though they may not have that much earnings, but they have the value for the brand and they stick to that one, even though they don't have much money, but the value they give. So in this case, this value, how should be our attitude? Can you just elaborate? I did not get much in this.
Okay. So the question Amar is asking is, I took the example of a 500 rupees a Casio watch, or it could be an expensive Rolex watch. So the question is, what should be the attitude of having no value for it? See, no value in the sense, it doesn't, you don't fall a prey to it. You don't fall a slave to it. You understand it is just another gadget or a tool or something which helps you with your to help you with your time, or even you can use it as a tool to to embellish yourself, to and add an added appendage onto you. But with or without it, it really doesn't make you incomplete. So the moment, now how do you know whether that thing has a value for you in your life is you only feel complete with it. You wouldn't feel complete without it. So the expression of the value you have for something is the completeness you feel. So when you have no value for it, with or without it, you feel complete because inwardly you have grown. So the value here we're talking about is how much your mind is consumed by it. That is what determines the value. You understand? So, and once you grow, it really doesn't matter to you. It doesn't really add a charm to your life. So it's a mental state of not getting carried away with it. So a person may have it, may not have it, may enjoy it, may not enjoy it, but his appreciation for that is, so what? Big deal. It's an attitude. So what? So with it, no big deal. Without it, also there's no big deal. So that really tests whether what's your value for it. Because you're complete without it as well. You're wholesome without it. That sends a sense of assurance that you have gone beyond it. You've crossed the hurdle. You've crossed that level. You're fine, no big deal.
Got it, Guruji. Thank you. So ultimately, even the objective of watch is to see the time. Even you can see from mobile also. So if person should have motivation to, for example, if he can able to inspire with the time with the mobile also, fine. That's it. That should be the attitude.
Attitude. But still you can have a Patek Philippe watch. You can have a Rolex watch also. It is not a measurement. See, the dispossession is not a measurement of your attitude. Please mark it. It is easy to practice dispossession, but very difficult to practice dispossessive attitude. So many people mistake it to be dispossession. So don't mistake it that way. But so you don't try to cultivate that. That's why, as I clearly mentioned, nobody tries to cultivate an attitude of dispossessiveness. You be true to yourself. If you have a value for something, yes, I have a value for it. You cannot develop a dispossessive to the level where you are. Give yourself the time. Switch your attention to something higher. Over a period of time, what will happen? The object which enticed you loses its charm to you. It doesn't charm you anymore. It doesn't interest you anymore. Why? Because you are established in the higher. That happens over a period of time. Now, in that period of transition, be true to yourself. Example, let's say, Amar, you have a desire to have a Rolex watch. Let's say. And here we say, what is the big deal in having a Rolex watch? Now, don't have to frustrate yourself by trying to assume that there is no value in a Rolex watch. As far as you're concerned, you have a desire for Rolex watch. Keep it as it is. Carry on with your sadhana. And it's not that you are in a position to shell out $10,000 or $20,000 to buy a Rolex watch. That's the cost, I think, of a Rolex watch. Is it not? Maybe that's the value of those expensive timepieces. In fact, a Patek Philippe watch can put you $40,000, $50,000, just a watch. It can even go up to 100,000 US dollars. Imagine you have that kind of a fancy desire. Vedanta or Shastras will not say drop anything. No, if you have such a fancy thought, carry on. But then you're not in a position to get it. Don't frustrate yourself by dropping the thought. Instead, you cultivate other desire. Let's say you're also interested in Vedantic study. Carry on with Vedantic study. Over a period of 6 months or 8 months or a year, you find that there's enough knowledge and understanding in you that you would start questioning, is it really required that I should put $100,000 of my savings into a watch? Does it really matter? Is it really important? You start questioning it. You start reviewing the same desire from a wiser perspective. And that's when slowly a time would come, the object of having a Rolex watch will lose its charm on you. And thereafter, even 6 years, 5 years down the road, 5 years down the road, if you even have it, it really doesn't matter to you. You know, I had a very unique experience I'm here sharing. On one of my birthdays, this was more than 10 years ago, one of my students, a very, very dear student, very, very close. Everyone is dear. It's not that particularly I have a preference or that, but he took a lot of love and concern for the family, and he was very welcoming into their family, and he was most welcome into our family. And on one of my birthdays, he came and gave me a pen. And I realized it was a Mont Blanc. And the Mont Blanc pen costed 45,000 rupees. 40,000 odd rupees, it was a Mont Blanc. I'm saying this was 15 years ago, close to 13, 14 years ago, easily I remember. And I had kept it aside because I was very content using whatever pens I was using for my work. I had kept it aside. It was there in the cupboard. And 6-8 months or a year later, I took it out to use it for some purpose. And when I wanted to write it, it was not writing, the ink got dried up. So I called that student who gifted me and said, hey, you know, the pen you gave, I'm sorry, I never used it, I want to use it, now it's not writing. Can you go and get it refilled, get a new refill for it? Yes, Guruji, why not just pass it to me, I'll arrange it no soon. I gave it to him, and then 2 days later, he tells me, Guruji, I have lost the pen. I said, how come? He said, I had put the pen in the glove box of my car, wanting it to get it replaced, and I had gone to a party at a hotel last evening, and I had given my car for a valet parking. And I most likely suspect it would have happened there. I can't be sure because I can't go and pin them down, but I think I've lost it. I'm very sorry. And he said, I will arrange another one. I said, doesn't matter. I never encouraged him to go and pick up another one. Sir, now I ask you, did the possession of a Mont Blanc add any value to my life? Did the loss of that pen make any difference to my life? No difference. But I knew very much the value of it, what it meant. So I'm only sharing an example. So when you have risen above it, it loses a charm. It loses a charm. Believe me, this moment if I want a Mont Blanc, I can pick up my phone and just message someone, please arrange for this, it will be there. If I want it, I could have done that all the time, but it doesn't matter. I can still do the same thing with an ordinary pen. An ordinary ball pen, I can do the same writing. How does it matter? But if I have, imagine this This is a Mont Blanc pen, this is an ordinary 10 rupees pen. It doesn't really determine your attitude of dispossessiveness. So that's why I said don't measure your attitude of dispossessiveness by the quantity or quality. What is in your mind? Where are your thoughts? What consumes your thoughts? If your thoughts are constantly worshipping the world, then you have no vairagya for the world. But if your thoughts are constantly worshipping the higher, pegged on higher, the essentials of life, then you will develop a vairagya for the non-essentials. These are all non-essentials. But for some people, in fact for every one of us, the non-essentials are essentials at times, isn't it? Money becomes essentials of life. In fact, money never was an essential in my life. It never was, will never be. Life goes on. How it goes on, I do not know. Life goes on. Some divine messenger will come and keep providing for your sustenance. All what you need is your sustenance, isn't it? And I have put up a banner with only intention of passing out this knowledge. It needed a place, there is a place. It needed some furniture, it has got some furniture. It needs some facilities, it has got some facilities. Whatever is needed, it just happens. There is no need to have a planning, there is no need to have a master program. There is a divinity that shapes our ends, says Shakespeare. He will find what you need at the right time to make it happen. Hold up. So this is what I mean, the essentials of life. You know, when we started this foundation, not I, the foundation was started, we didn't, for close to now 3 years, the foundation is started. In the first few years, I would say couple of years, we didn't even have the resources to pay the rent for the foundation. And people who are concerned were saying, why do you need this place? I said, I don't know. We need a place. A temple also has a place, no? A temple, even to put a phantom sanctum, we need a temple. So I treat it as a temple. I treat it as a temple of knowledge. And somehow we scratched through, somehow we found things started happening. Why should you doubt the cause? The running of the foundation, the works, all of this has always been non-essential. In fact, how many students are there? How many have been benefited? Why not we have, genuinely people are concerned, we should take this knowledge to many more people. If you ask me, I am very much in line with the thought with you all. But you ask me, does it bother me? Because that is non-essential for me. What is essential for me is my sadhana. And I shall serve, but it will happen. Let it happen in its own way. But every moment there is an effort put in. As I say this, every moment there is an effort put in to reach this knowledge out. In fact, Setaramanji, just before I came to the center at 5:20, he messaged me, Guruji, is it possible to send an email with an invite to someone who might be more than happy to join the class? And I had a few things to be done before. At prompt 5:30 the button started. I genuinely accommodated to draft the necessary message and the email, communicated that so that it reaches them, communicated to him saying, please ensure that that person is aware that the message has come his way. Every effort, every stone is not left unturned to reach this knowledge to as many as possible. At the same time, it is non-essential for me. The essential is the higher knowledge. Men may come, men may go, but I go on forever. I don't know who said that. So in this spiritual field, that is non-essential for me. It's like a businessman is interested in how many clients he has got. It's non-essential. Do your work. Automatically it will have its own numbers. So I know you didn't ask for all that, Amar, but I hope you're clear with what this attitude of dispossessiveness is.
Very much clear, Guruji. Thanks for sharing. The way you give examples, it sticks to me that long period of time, whatever you give. Thank you very much.
Welcome, welcome. Any other comments? The Brook by Lord Tennyson. I shall take a note of it, because every time I keep quoting it. Let me take a note. The Brook. All right. So, moving on to the second question. How do you explain Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? I would agree that most of you thought along, but just to bring a little clarity to the question, this is not a leading question. This is a direct question. Don't worry. So once in a while only leading question comes. So from now on, don't keep thinking, is it a leading question? Is it a straightforward question? It's a straightforward question. How do you explain Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? Okay. Now, relative standpoint is only toning down the absolute standpoint. Point one, a relative standpoint is only toning down the absolute standpoint. Point two, the only reason you need to have a relative standpoint is so that you can get to the absolute standpoint someday. Okay, and relative standpoint is nothing but a relative goal in one's life. You cannot conceive the absolute standpoint, which is self-realization. So the qualities of Brahman, that is the goal. If Brahman is the goal, is the absolute standpoint, what is the Brahman from a relative standpoint? Because the theme of Vedantic knowledge is talking about the goal of realization. Vedanta talks about realization. Now, what is your understanding of realization? What is your understanding of Brahman? What is your understanding of Vedantic knowledge from a relative standpoint? And why do you need the relative standpoint? Is because only when you reach here, you can get there. So, relative standpoint is the means, absolute standpoint is the end. And if you don't have clarity of a relative standpoint, you can't get anywhere beyond it to the absolute standpoint. So how does one understand the relative standpoint of what the Vedanta is advocating us? So the relative standpoint of Vedantic school of thought or Vedantic knowledge, there are various points. It just gives you an idea as to what could be the goal you want to pitch it for yourself. So if absolute standpoint is self-realization, relative standpoint is self-purification, self-evolution, self-development. Self-purification, self-evolution, self-development. Now these are again very generic terms. What is that concept of self-development we're talking about? Or self-management we're talking about? Now, what Vedanta gives, Vedanta in short can be said to be an instruction manual to life and living. If somebody asks you, what are you learning in the Gita? It is just, what are you learning in Bhaja Govindam? What are you learning in the scriptures? An instruction manual to life and living. That's all. and a manual which gives us a right relationship with the world. It helps you to establish a right relationship with the world. It is not the world that's the problem, it is your relationship with the world. So these are the fundamentals of Vedanta. You start off Vedantic knowledge with this standpoint. And then when you come to self-purification, so start off by saying Vedanta is an instruction manual. I must learn how to live first. And then start talking about self-purification. So what is the concept of self-purification? You can say, I want to get established in the Sattvic Guna. I want to enhance my Sattvic Guna. That is what Vedanta from a relative standpoint. So as you reach midway or as you keep evolving, these are the relative goals you must have. You must have a goal that I want to become a Sattvic person. Another point, I want to reach a state, I want to achieve this state where I am not affected by the pass of opposites, profit or loss, love or hatred, joy or sorrow, praise or censure, good or bad, all these should not affect me. That's again a state you want to reach. You want to reach a state, third point, you want to reach a state where you experience contentment. I am very contented in life. Whatever I am, wherever I am, very contented. Why? I don't want to complain about things in life, but contented. Point 4, you can say, I want to reach a state where I radiate this peace and harmony in whatever I do. Wherever I go, I want to radiate this wave of peace and harmony. Not friction and agitation. I want to radiate this peace and harmony. Also, you can further say, I want to develop the spirit of being objective in life. I don't want to get carried away with things in life. I don't want to become emotional. I want to be very objective. I want to remain very dynamic in my life, very active. And also, some of you have commented that you must develop this, cultivate this quality of humility, self-control. Rajima put it very beautifully. She just used the word GPS. All the Vedantic knowledge is GPS to life. What are you making so much fuss about? Put on the GPS, it will take you to the goal. Now, can I also have one GPS, please? Please, request, humble request, or GPS India Kudungo. So it will take me to the goal. I am seem to be meandering. I am getting lost India. So, and then some said, practice self-control. So sweet of you, ma. So, without ego, Vasantama said to have without ego, humility, shraddha, study, reflection. These are the few points you all have said. But all these could be very clear aspects which you can relate to, which Vedanta chosen as relative goals you want to reach. It's like a person who is an athlete and he wants to compete in Olympics. If competing in Olympics is an absolute goal, what should be the relative goal for him? Sethuramanji, what should be a relative goal for a person, an athlete, he wants to compete in Olympics? What should be the relative goal?
National and Asians.
He should be a national champion first. Correct, Ilya? If you nowhere in the national probables, where is the chance of representing in the Olympics? Isn't it? So, if nationals is too high, what should be the further relative goal?
To reach the nationals, what should be your goal?
Yeah, we should be local and then regional and state, zonal, and then national.
Correct. Start from zonal to the whatever you said, local, go to the state, interstate, south of the country, and then go to the national. South zone, correct. So that is how you have exactly the same way Vedantic wisdom also must be first looked at from a very clear relative goal. And a goal, and what is the most quintessential aspect of a goal? Okay. I want you all, sir, I will repeat the question. The question is, what are the quintessential aspects of a goal? I shall type it out as well. It is a question for your thought. Don't need to answer that, think over it. What are the quintessential aspects of a goal? Lakshmi Ma, think for the answers. Think about it. Think of the question. Don't have to present any answers now. Think of it. It will help you consolidate. So the only reason why I'm giving questions as homework is it consumes your thought and the thoughts will get consolidated. If things are addressed and answered now, they are floating. They will die away. Okay, so that's the objective with which I am giving these questions. So these were, I thought, very beautiful concepts for your own reflection. Take a note of these points. Okay. Any comments? Any clarification? Okay. All right. So if there are none, let's get back to the text. Bhajagovindam is a text. You would have. I almost forgot what text it is. So when I'm telling you, I'm reminding myself. So I have got carried away with the two questions. So long way to go. Let's chant verse 18. Suramandira-taru moola-nivasah shayya-bhutala majinam vasah sarva-parigraha bhoga-tyagaha tasya sukham naka roti viragaha. Suramandira-taru moola-nivasah shayya-bhutala majinam vasah sarva-parigraha bhoga-tyagaha kasya sukham naka roti viragaha. So the 18th verse, titled A Man of True Dispassion. So the translation, residing under a tree in a temple, not any tree here and there. He chose to reside under a tree in a temple. Suramandira-taru moola-nivasah shayya bhutala, sleeping on ground. wearing bear skin, ajinam vasaha. He uses the bear skin as a cloth to clothe himself. Renouncing all possession and enjoyment. Kasya sukham na karoti viragaha. To him will not dispassion bring happiness. Now, don't be confused by the terms or the concepts he uses, because you may find them similar to what he would have said in 15, 16 and 17. So if you take a note, 14th verse talked about a person who is a hypocrite. 15, 16, 17 spoke about a spiritual practitioner who is very genuine, very sweet fellow, very sincere, but he goes about it wrong way. He gone about wrong way because he got a wrong guru. Or not. Just because you have a guru doesn't mean he's right. He got a wrong guide. Malfunctioning GPS. It took somewhere else. All that. So 15, 16, 17, malfunctioning GPS. 18th verse, he talks of a very sincere, very genuine guy, but here he got the right direction, the right guru, he's on the right path, which gives him the favorable results, which is that attitude of this possessiveness. Here is a man who has achieved that state of renunciation, which perhaps till now could have given impression that renunciation is a myth. It's not possible to actually get to that state of renunciation. So here he says, it is very much possible that you can reach that state of being an ascetic, which he puts it in his own language. Okay. Now, what does he say? Living under a tree in a temple, sleeping on the ground, wearing bear skin, etc. indicates, again they are symbolic. You don't have to clear your wardrobe and go hunting to get a deer skin now. Don't do that, you might land in trouble. It's not literally that you start doing it. What was applicable then doesn't necessarily be applicable now. Now what it means is, here people who have standardized their lives, who know what their needs are. He has analyzed his life, he has taken care of his wants so that he can think of the higher, pursue the higher. In fact, there is this one quality known as standardization of your life. You must learn to standardize your life. Jayama will know very much, or she can recall this quality of standardizing life. Isn't Jayama correct? Solungo, what does standardization mean? Jayama, Solungo, what does standardization mean?
Hari Om Guruji. Standardization means to put a cap on every want, the number of clothes, on all your possessions. All you say, this is enough. I can manage with this. And I have implemented this to a certain extent because of your Guruji. After retirement, I have not bought any sari.
Oh, wow. Very nice. So rightly said that standardization gives you put a cap on your acquisitions. When you see put a cap, that is put a maximum cap, so that you don't frustrate yourself. If your cap of wants are X number of clothing or X number of things, put a higher end cap, so that you don't frustrate yourself. Go ahead and get to that extent. And once you get that, you stop thinking of it. Your mind doesn't run in the direction. You've got it, you're happy, contented with it. So like that, whatever you need in life. You know, the standard of your phone or your watch or your car, or your starting from your pen. What if you want to? What kind of garments you wear? What standard you would wear? You would go to an ordinary place and get garment, or you would go to a Raymond's. You only have to wear Raymond. I don't know. I'm just saying anything. So everything is standardized. I use a pen. Is it a Mont Blanc pen or a normal Reynolds pen? Standardize it. Otherwise, there is no end to it. I want to wear a watch. What standard watch I'll wear, etc. So when you standardize, your mind is thereafter taken off that pursuit. Then you can switch your attention to the higher. So here he talks of a person who has standardized his life. What's your minimum? Get that, and thereafter don't bother, don't frustrate yourself. For such a person, he says, renouncing all possession and enjoyment. Here, renouncing possession and enjoyment refers to renouncing the possessive attitude of possession and enjoyment. It is not literally the possession and enjoyment, the possessive attitude. For him, will dispassion not bring happiness? It will bring happiness. A person who is living the life of dispassion, for him, he finds himself full of peace and bliss and happiness. That's what he says. In the so here is this concept of richness and poorness. So when you find yourself rich, who is a rich person? A rich person is measured by not the quantum. A rich person is measured by his desires are well within his income. So you reach a state where you have standardized, your desires are well contained, you're rich. Otherwise, you will find yourselves poor. Your desires are more than your income, you're poor. And what does that do? When your desires are more than your income, what does it do? Rajima? When your desires are more than one's income, what does it do to you?
Agitated because you aren't able to get that what you desire, and then you indulge in other ways and means to obtain it. Like taking loans and mortgage. I mean, they mortgage their house and they buy more things.
You get caught up in a trap, isn't it? It's a vicious trap. Yes, Setuji?
What's it?
I have something to say, sir.
You get you get frustrated, you lose sleep and agitated, and when you have more desires than what you can afford, you get into debt and you will be always worried.
I don't know whether you all are seemingly missing the point. If you are poor, your desires are more than your income, what does it do to you? We're not talking of whether the person is peaceful or agitated. What are we talking about here?
We are talking, he is not a giver, he is a taker.
Sir, we are not talking of giving and taking here. What is the title of the verse, Sethuramanji? What is the title of the verse?
Man of dispassion.
A man of dispassion. Now, can you connect the man of dispassion to this concept of richness and poorness? When a person is rich, we are saying a rich man is one whose desires are within his income. A poor man is one whose desires are more than his income. So when your desires are more than your income, what happens? It generates a lot of passion for the world. But when your desires are well within your income, you have reached your point of saturation, you have standardized your life, then you have a dispassion towards the pursuit of them. It doesn't consume you, it doesn't bother you, you can truly be dispassionate. It's a very subtle point here. As I've said, when you have something your money can buy, you have bought it, thereafter you will not think about it, doesn't it? But if your desires are too many that money can't buy, all your life you'll be running behind fulfilling them. Because your mind always entertains desires for things you don't have, which your mind keeps chasing you outward. Then you are full of passion. But when you have reached a state that you are rich within and you have standardized your life, there is no point constantly go on acquiring. Through knowledge and reason, you have standardize your needs. I don't want anything more than that. I'm quite content with what I have. You put a lid on your desires, then you become rich, you become dispassionate to them. You don't just start running berserk whenever there is some sale out there. You go and buy whatever you want, how many you want, but not just keep crazily acquiring. But whatever you acquired, you make good use of it and it serves a purpose. Absolutely has a purpose. Then go ahead and get whatever you want. But once you've got it, you have a certain dispassion for it. And that is what this man is. He is very content living under a tree in a temple, wearing a deer skin, sleeping on the ground, means that's what his needs are. He has standardized it so that his thoughts are on higher. And then you have the dispassion. He says, will it not bring happiness? It certainly will bring happiness. There is a beautiful saying by Oliver Goldsmith in the poem called The Village Preacher. He talks about a person who was passing rich with 40 pounds a year. 40 pounds a year, na? How many pounds a month? Just over 3 pounds. He was rich with 40 pounds in a year. Such a beautiful phrase. Now, do I find myself rich or do I find myself poor? You got to find out what makes you rich, what makes you poor. So to the extent you are rich, you are dispassionate. To the extent you are poor, you are still passionate behind the world. So this man here is a man of true dispassion. He has no value for all that glorious things. I must have a villa. I must have my home must be a villa, gated community. I must have a farmland. I must have a farmhouse. I must have this much this much that. And if you keep building that kind of mental requirement, you find yourself, you are very poor. So, this verse, he says, here is a person, he renounces all his cravings for possession and enjoyment. He gets over the freedom from delusion and he finds himself truly bliss in true happiness.
Guruji, how
Yeah, Jayama.
is this man different from the man of the other verses? What is the clinching point here to say that he is dispassionate? Because in the other verses also people were quite austere and all that. And how is this man different from the verses of 15, 16 and 17? I can't, I'm still trying to understand how this verse man is different from the other three verses.
See, I did mention that don't go by the terms used to describe. Here, the takeaway is, here he is a person who has found, he says, Sukham. The takeaway is, here is a person who finds himself reveling in peace and happiness. He is Kasya Sukham, Nakaroti Viragaha. Viragaha means he is dispassionate. Nakaroti. Will it not bring happiness? So, when you talk of dispassion and happiness, these are two synonymous things. Whenever you fall a prey to passion, you find yourself very possessed. You're very obsessed. If you're passionate for power, or name, or wealth, or any passion, it causes a lot of strain, because you're trying to chase, running for something you don't possess. There's a lot of pressure felt in you. You see that? So here this man, because of his dispassion, he has found happiness. Sukham is there in his life. And that's the takeaway. Because the cause and effect, wherever there is happiness, happiness, in fact, as somebody just commented, contentment is the greatest wealth, which is true. A person who is contented, that person is blessed. And contentment is never measured by your material quotient. Contentment is never measured by your material quotient. Contentment is measured by, Rajima? Contentment is measured by it is your spiritual quotient. So the spiritual quotient, we've discussed this point before. Spiritual quotient and material quotient are two independent quotients. And here he says this man is happy. And what brings about happiness? It is dispassion. That's the takeaway, which is a trademark of a spiritual person. So that's how you would justify your interpretation that here is a man of dispassion. Okay, Jayama? Perfect. Okay. Now again remember, you can't put on an external act. When you have genuinely got yourself established in the higher, these, you are able to find yourself with great comfort even with the most simplest of things. Understand? So this life of simplicity is because of establishment in the higher. It's a relative thing, but again not a physical measurement, but a mental attitude. Attitude of dispassion. Okay. So with this, actually it ends a certain line of thought, and in fact the 19th verse is another classic, very, very famous verse. I'm afraid I can't get into it, but we all will look forward for this verse coming week. The very famous Yogaratova, Bhogaratova, Sangharatova, Sangavhinaha, Yasya Brahmani Ramate Chittam, Nandati Nandati Nandatyeva. Beautiful verse. Okay. So, shall leave you with this. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Hari Om. Hari Om.